Hello, I'm George Cairns, and in this video lesson I'm going to use Photoshop CC to computer generate some trees from scratch to enhance a photograph such as this one here. We've got some unsightly street furniture, we've got quite a lot of empty space and some ugly scaffolding there, but a little bit of tree action there will help to generate more interest in the image. We've got some shallow depth of field here by blurring this foreground tree, so it's just adding a bit of depth, variety, and also hiding things that we don't want to see, such as this lamppost. So I'm going to show you how to generate some trees from scratch and then give you some compositing tips and tricks to help them look like they're part of the scene. So kick off by opening the photograph that you want to enhance with a few trees, and then we'll go and create a new layer in the layers palette by clicking on this icon here. It's good to create trees on the separate layers because then you can move them around, reposition them, scale them, and even blur them to create a depth of field effect. So once you've selected your new transparent layer, pop up to Filter, go down to Render and choose Tree. Up pops this window here, and you can see by default we've got the mighty oak tree. But what we're going to do, because we're in Turkey, in Istanbul, we're going to add some palm trees to the shot. As you can see, there's a variety of different types, including palms here. So I'm going to go to the basic tree type and change it by going down to palm tree. And you can see we get a little preview there of the different types of trees available. So click to select that. It looks a little bit weedy to start with, so let's just play around by increasing the number of leaves there. And you can also randomize the tree as well by just dragging the slider, and that's a great way of creating lots of different types of tree. You can also try ticking here to generate different types of random trees with different trunks and different leaves, but they're all based on the palm tree model in this case. You can change the leaves if you want, but because we're using a palm tree, we want to have palm leaves, so I'll stick to the defaults. And you can always experiment and then go back to default leaves by clicking here, if need be. Now the Advanced tab sounds exciting, but there's not a huge amount there for you to worry about. You've got to make sure you've got Enhanced Contrast ticked, otherwise it looks a little bit flat and bland, and you don't really want flat shading. That's just going to give you a simplified version of the leaves, so let's just untick that for more complicated rendered versions. You can fine-tune the color if you want to and change the color of the branches if need be. And also you can tilt the camera. If the camera was from a higher angle, for example, you could click and drag and it will then tilt up a little bit or down a little bit depending on what slider you're using. So slightly up there, but this is really from the ground, so I'm going to just slide that all the way back down to 0 so that the tree angle matches the angle of the trees and the buildings in the source image. Let's go back to basics here. To get the tree to fit into the scene, it's worth considering the lighting. And from the shadow, we can see that the sun is slightly behind the camera, but to the left a little bit, fairly flat lit. So we can play with the light direction and just drag that to the left a little bit. So you've got a little bit of shadow there on the right of the tree, as we have here, a little bit of shadow there going to the right. So that'll just help the lighting match the lighting in the scene. So when you've tinkered with all these settings, you're ready to click OK to render up a version of the scene onto your transparent layer, like so. Then you can press V for the move tool or click here to select it, and you can drag the tree around in the frame into a position that suits the composition. Let's just try and hide that lamppost a little bit with this foreground tree, like so. Because it's on a separate layer, we can move it at any time in the future. Let's add a few more trees just to hide the clutter in this area here. I'm going to create a new layer, pop up to Filter, go down to Render again, back to Tree. Up pops this window here, and I can randomize the shape very quickly to create a different type of tree. Just click and drag like that. That's going to look different to the other one there. Change the leaf amount as well, just to give it a bit more variety, and then just click OK. And drag it down into position, like so. I'm going to press Command T or Control T for the transform tool, and then Shift click to keep the proportions. I can then scale that down and make it slightly smaller, and in the distance a little bit more, like so. Let's go for another layer very quickly. Filter, Render, Tree. Change the arrangement. Change the leaves amount. Keep everything else the same. Click OK. And there we have another tree on another layer in the foreground. I can press Command T for the free transform tool and then just rotate that slightly. Just angle it a little bit more. Hit return, like so. Now I'm going to select the very first tree I created, press Command J or Control J to create a copy, as you can see here, and then Command or Control T to then scale it up with the transform tool and just bring it down into the foreground here. I'm going to rotate it slightly for variety as well. And this is a more foreground tree. I don't want to block the mosque in the background. Something like that should do the trick. And what I'm going to do is just add a little bit of blur to this one just to soften it and give us a nice shallow depth of field as it's much closer. And to do that, I'm going to go to Filter. I'm going to go down to the Blur Gallery. I'm going to choose a Field Blur and then just drop it from the default 15 down to something a little bit less blurry. And then just click OK to create a little bit of depth by adding some foreground blur to this tree, like so. I can still move that about and place it in a more subtle position at the bottom of the frame. And because it's blurred, it's looking a bit less computer generated and a little bit more realistic. Now it's worth going to the zoom tool and double clicking to see the actual pixels, and you'll see we've got a little bit of grain there in our source photograph, but our computer generated trees are looking too clean. So if I grab the move tool, click auto select, I can click to select that trees layer, and then we can add a little bit of noise to it by going to filter, noise, add noise. Click to preview an area such as this. Let's add some Gaussian noise. Let's make it monochromatic and let's just experiment. That's far too much, of course. So we'll take it down to a much lower value to try and match the noise in the background. If I go down to about 2, I think we'll probably get quite a subtle grain effect, maybe 3%. I don't want to go too far, otherwise it's going to look a little bit over the top. Click OK, just to add a little bit of noise to my computer generated tree. And then Z for the zoom tool, right click, fit on screen. I can now grab the move tool and click on the other tree layers like this one, and then press Command or Control F to apply the last filter, which was one that adds noise. I'll do that with this tree as well. Command F. And now we've added a little bit of grain, and again on this foreground tree here. So all the trees are now similarly grained and they begin to match the background a little bit more effectively. Now I'm going to leave you with a final subtle compositing tip. Our computer generated elements have got very dark shadows in the blackest parts, but the darkest pixels in the photograph aren't quite as dark as our CG elements. So what we need to do is just lighten these up a little bit to help them blend more effectively with the background. They stand out too much otherwise with their really high contrast look. So what I'm going to do is just click to select this tree here. And in fact, I'm going to shift click to select both these layers. And what I'm going to do is just group them together like so. And then I'm going to apply an adjustment layer to the group to lighten the darkest pixels. So to do that, I'm going to click here and choose a levels adjustment layer. And I'm going to clip it to the group by holding down the Alt key and moving between the group and the adjustment layer and clicking. And now that's clipped to the group. So it's only going to change the levels of the trees that are in this grouped folder. What we can do, if we drag the output levels to the right, we can lighten up the darkest pixels there. That's too much, but I'm just showing you the effect it can make. So something more subtle like this will then help the darkest pixels match the darkest pixels in the building, like so. And that's just a subtle way of creating a more convincing composite image. I might want to do that with this tree as well, actually. So I will do that with another adjustment layer. Click on here, and then we'll just go and choose levels again. And I'm just going to Alt click again between the two and then just tweak the output levels again. Like so. Very subtle, but it's worth doing just to help sell the composite image. So we've got an image made up of separate layers, and one way to sort of get everything blended together is to click at the top of the layer stack, press Shift, Alt, Command and E, or Shift, Alt, Control and E on a PC, and that creates a stamp visible layer which we can then take into the camera raw filter, like so. We can go to effects and we can just add a little vignette, and that just helps blend all of the elements together. I'm just going to move the midpoint out a little bit, and that gives us a more cohesive and convincing composite image. Let's click OK to finish off like so. And we still have our layers below if we need to access those in the future to add more trees or to fine-tune adjustment layers, for example.